What's up guys, Patrick here. For those of you who don't know or maybe new to the channel, I'm a physical therapist who also trains jiu-jitsu and MMA, and I also treat mainly combat athletes. And today we're going to look at a question that a subscriber recently asked me about a meniscus tear and when to return back to training. He initially commented on the video that I did where I rehabbed my LCL tear without surgery, so go check that out after this video, link in the comments. So his name was Chris, and he says, "Any chance you can make a video just like this one for a meniscus tear? I tore mine during an MMA workout. Currently I can work out in the gym, but I have pain during twisting of the leg, like in punching hooks, and random moments during the day. Hope you can give us your expertise. Cheers." I appreciate the question, Chris, and I know you're not the only one with this problem since we are dealing with the combat sports. So I figured I would do a video on it and just kind of explain how I walk Chris through his steps. So I'll start by explaining what the meniscus is, and then I'll briefly talk about the types of meniscus tears, and then finally we'll discuss whether to decide if you need an MRI or to rehab it on your own. And if you do decide to rehab it on your own, how to go about doing that. All right, let's look a little bit into the anatomy of the meniscus. So the meniscus, as many of you may already know, is fibrocartilage that lines the surfaces of our joints. And it's meant to have a cushioning effect and help distribute force through the knee. What's also really important to know about the meniscus is it doesn't really have a good blood supply like other tissues of our bodies. In fact, it's divided into thirds: red, red-white, and white. Now, the further into the meniscus that we go from the outer layers, the worse the blood supply. And that's going to play into how we treat different tears in different sections of the meniscus a little bit later on. And now for the types of meniscus tears. And there are quite a few of these, but I'm going to discuss the four most common. The first is called an incomplete or intrasubstance tear. And like the name suggests, it happens within the substance of the meniscus, not actually on the surface. These are most commonly seen in folks in their 20s and 30s, and with the right activity modification and rehab, they can heal really well on their own. The second is a horizontal tear. Unlike the intrasubstance tear, it occurs on the surface and it actually runs parallel to the fibers of the meniscus. So these can occur on the outer layer of the meniscus, which we learned earlier is the more vascularized portion of that structure. So they heal very well. But these can occur in the innermost section, or the white section we talked about. And in this case, it's really hard to heal even if they do surgery. The good news is that most of the time they're closer to the outer layer, so they do well with conservative management like physical therapy. The third is a radial tear. Now, radial tears by definition occur exclusively within the white section of the meniscus, which again we know is not well vascularized. And unfortunately, this means that they're unlikely to heal without surgery. And the fourth is the bucket handle tear. So like the name suggests, think about how a bucket handle acts whenever you go to pick up a bucket. Well, if the meniscus is torn this way, the meniscus can act like a bucket handle, hence the name, and actually flip over into the joint space and not allow it to move very well. And it can actually prevent it from fully straightening or bending, almost like it's locked. And considering the depth of the tear and the amount of impact that it has on your daily function, these are very unlikely to heal without surgery. All right, before we get into whether or not you should get an MRI, please consider subscribing if you like this stuff. I really like making these videos and would love to do it much more often, and subscribing would really help big time. All right, so do I get an MRI? This is going to depend solely on your symptoms and how much it limits your activity. So here are the guidelines that I generally give my athletes. So if you only feel it randomly and relatively infrequently throughout the day and you really don't have to modify your training that much, for example, if you have a boxing workout and it hurts when you pivot on that front leg to throw the three, if you can work on other combinations, footwork, or ground game without having to put too much pressure down and pivot on that knee to make it symptomatic, then I wouldn't recommend getting an MRI. Spend 2 to 3 months prioritizing other parts of your game. Prioritize your strength training for a bit, focusing on exercises that target the legs but that don't exacerbate your symptoms. And then reintroduce those movements slowly back into your training. That's essentially the advice I ended up giving Chris, with a little bit more detail and nuance on exercises that were specific to his situation. Now, on the other hand, let's say that every time you walk up the stairs or anytime you try to stand up from sitting for a long period of time, your leg buckles out and it clicks and gives on you. You'll probably need to go get an MRI to determine the severity of the tear, especially since it's limiting your function so much. So sometimes people ask me, "Pat, why don't I just go get an MRI and figure out what type of tear it is?" Or, "Pat, why don't I just go get it repaired and have it done with?" And there are some pretty good reasons why these may not be the best option. The first reason is that MRIs are super expensive, and most people want to minimize the financial burden that the healthcare system already puts on us. And second, evidence suggests that especially when we're talking about the first two types of tears that we discussed earlier, if you get surgery versus do conservative management, having surgery often doesn't lead to better outcomes. So one of my favorite studies on this actually split up two groups of people who had confirmed intrasubstance tears, which is the first tear we talked about. One group got the meniscus repair and was told that they were getting the meniscus repair. The other group was told that they were having a meniscus repair, but they actually got a sham surgery, meaning that they went in, but they didn't actually repair the meniscus. And at any of the follow-up times up into a year, there were no significant differences in the amount of pain that they had or the amount of function that they reported. And if you look at the graphs, most of the improvements in pain and function occurred within the first 3 months. And this makes sense when we think about the healing times of cartilage, given its poor blood supply. This is also why I give the 2 to 3 month recommendation for combat athletes that I don't feel like need to go get an MRI. And finally, imaging studies have shown us time and time again that if we have a meniscus tear that's symptomatic, we very often have a meniscus tear on the other side that's not symptomatic. So if we have tears in both knees and only one knee is symptomatic, is it really the meniscus that's causing the pain, or could it be something else? Very often it's something else. And often we see the stronger that you get in that leg, the more the pain decreases, which is why I also recommend prioritizing strengthening for that 2 to 3 months while you modify your training. I also have to say this advice is not meant in any way to supersede going to see a medical professional about your injury. While I do hope that this advice helps you make a decision, going to see a physical therapist is your best bet. They'll be able to do a thorough evaluation and provide a more specific recommendation for you. Now, if you don't feel that you have a good physical therapist that you trust, or that you feel just doesn't have a lot of experience within the combat sports, send me an email at combatathletephysio@gmail.com. I'll do my best to respond quickly and point you in the right direction. Also, don't forget to leave a comment down below and recommend some things that you might want to see in the future. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.